Welcome to The Long Road to Publishing, the podcast where we hear from authors who have traveled a long and bumpy road to publishing their books. Whether you're just starting out on your own writing and publishing journey, or if you're all too aware of the many possible detours, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Eva Langston, author, writing instructor, and creator of Eva's newsletter for writers on Substack. Thank you so much for coming along on the ride. Hello there. So, even though this is my 8th episode of the podcast, it's actually my very first interview I recorded back in March. So, a big thanks to Kat Lewis for being my guinea pig. I was hoping we'd have a publication date by now for her debut novel, Good People, but we do not. So, be sure to follow her on Substack and Instagram to keep informed and watch for Good People sometime in 2026. Now, I have to say, I've learned a few things since recording and editing this conversation, but hopefully you can't tell too much what a newbie I was, although I realize I'm telling you right now, so maybe I just shouldn't have said anything. But anyway, I am so excited to finally be able to share this episode with Kat about her 10-year journey to getting her first book deal. Before we start, a quick reminder to rate and review the podcast if you're on an app that accepts such things, and consider sharing about the long road to publishing on social media or to writing friends. Thank you so much for listening. And now on with the episode, which I'm calling 10 Years and a Ton of Revisions, or The Book That Came Back to Life. Today we have Kat Lewis. Kat is a fiction writer and video game narrative designer based in Tampa, Florida. She is the founder of Craft with Kat, a best-selling Substack newsletter with practical craft lessons for writers. Her debut novel, Good People, is forthcoming from Simon Schuster. So Kat, welcome to The Long Road to Publishing.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about publishing and how messy it is.
Yes, and all kinds of things that have happened to you along the way. And I want to get into all the steps along the journey. But first, I did want to know, so your debut novel, Good People, is coming out in 2026. Do you have an exact date yet?
Not quite yet. I turned in what might be the final draft a couple weeks ago. I'm still waiting for feedback and confirmation from my editor. So once that's finalized, I get the actual pub date, but we're fairly certain it'll come out summer 2026.
Okay. Well, so maybe we'll put that in the show notes because this is going to be coming out in a
Yeah.
few months. Do you want to give us a little quick pitch for Good People?
Yeah, sure. So Good People is an adult literary novel that follows the story of Jolene Tope, a white girl who was raised by a black family, and she's applying to become a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. So she has to come to terms with her identity as she's going through elite academia and all of the kind of racism and classism that's involved in that.
That sounds really interesting. And I'm going to have more questions about that, I'm sure. But before that, I did want to just really quickly ask you because I know nothing about video games. I mean, I played Mario, as a child, but so can you just tell me what your job is like and maybe some video games you've worked on? What does a video game narrative designer do?
I was living in South Korea for several years. I recently moved back to the US ahead of my book's release, but I worked on video games for a company that was called 433 Creative Lab, and I worked for their crypto Web3 blockchain division. So I worked on
Oh, wow.
crypto games, Web3 games for a company called D Labs. So if that's your type of thing, you could check out Rumble Racing Star or Space Frontier. Those are the games that I worked on. I think the company has changed a lot in the last year since I left, so I can't really speak to what's going on with the games now, but I can kind of talk to about like my job itself. So Rumble Racing Star was a Web3 kart racing game that's very similar to Mario Kart in a lot of ways. So the dev team would give me a bunch of different visual assets for the characters, and I would write their backstories. I'd write the descriptive copy that would go in the games that absolutely nobody reads. And then I'd name them and do lots of different things. And then I would also create marketing collateral for social media and stuff.
Well, that's kind of cool because I feel like that's sort of the thing that some writers really enjoy is like making the character backstory, the stuff that you're like, okay, I'm probably gonna have to cut this out of the novel, but do you feel like doing that has bled over into your other writing that you do?
Yeah, I think my work on an RPG is a little bit more similar to what I would do as a novelist. So I also worked on an open world space survival RPG called Space Frontier. And working on that game taught me actually how to write plot. So even though I have 2 degrees in creative writing, I studied, literary fiction because that's all that most creative writing programs give you. And they don't teach how to write plot at all. At all. Like when I would ask my thesis advisor at the University of San Francisco, I was like, how do I write plot? And he's like, you don't got to worry about that. But you
Oh
do
my
actually
gosh.
have to worry about. So writing
Oh
for
my
video
gosh.
games just taught me how to write external plot more effectively, and that's like been the most valuable experience of my writing life, I think.
That is so interesting. Okay, so that's one of the things I definitely wanted to ask you about because I knew that you had gotten your MFA and I had the same experience. And I don't know, when did I graduate? It was a long time ago. And that was my experience of like, we're learning like line level writing, but we're not learning how to plot, certainly not how to plot a novel. And I don't know if maybe some MFAs are changing. I mean, even a literary fiction novel has to have a plot. Well, okay, so since we're talking about you getting your MFA, maybe this is a good place to dive in. When would you say that you got serious about writing? Would you say when you started your MFA or before that?
I always like feel weird answering this question because I got very serious very young, but that was mostly because I had family that had very high expectations. They wanted me as young as possible to know what I wanted to do so that they could prepare me to be ahead when I go to college and ahead when I go to grad school or whatever I choose to do. So I went to a boarding school for some of middle school and high school, but I convinced my parents to let me come home because my sister was doing school online. So she would have class from 7 a.m. to noon, and then the rest of the day was hers. And at the time, I was very precocious, like 13. I know I was about 15-year-old, and I wanted to become a rock star. And the way that my boarding school schedule was built, I didn't have enough time to practice or enough time that felt satisfying for me to practice my craft as a guitarist every day. So I convinced my parents to let me come home and do online school, which was a mistake for a lot of reasons because there was no social aspect. I was just stuck in the house with my family, but I barely touched my guitar. I ended up writing 2 novels and a screenplay. I use quotes because I was a child, like there none of that will see the light of
Right.
day, but it was really important practice because it kind of helped me realize like this is the work that it takes to complete a book early on, and it helped me verify that like yes, I'm willing to do that work and this is something that I'm really passionate about. So from age 15 or so, I kind of knew that this was what I wanted to do professionally, and I took myself maybe a little bit too seriously as a young person.
And so then did you study writing in undergraduate and then go to get your MFA?
Yeah, so I studied writing seminars at Johns Hopkins in undergrad. So I worked with a lot of very big literary professors at the time. And then I went on to do the first year of my MFA program at the University of San Francisco and eventually transferred to a more, well, both programs are pretty genre friendly in terms of like MFA programs, but I transferred to a fully funded program at University of South Florida. And that's where I eventually got my degree from.
So when you were in your MFA program, did you mostly focus on short stories then, which because I know often that's what they want you to do, or were you trying to work on a novel?
This was like something that frustrated me a lot when I was in undergrad too, is that they weren't preparing anybody to be novelists. And like as a kid, I never really read short stories and stuff. So when I hit, undergrad at Johns Hopkins at 18 years old, I was like, why are you guys making me write short stories? Me being very eager to have a career, I was like, I don't see a career for short story writers. I don't see me making money to support myself, to support my writing, doing this. Why aren't we learning how to write novels? And so I kind of just figured out a way to make my coursework in undergrad work for myself, where I was writing, short stories based off of the characters I was already developing in a novel that I would, of course, abandon because I was a kid back then. And so when I got to the MFA program, I was really excited because it was the first time that novels were going to be treated more as an actual career path and like training to actually do a novel. So if I wrote a short story, I published a lot of short stories, but those were only things that were forced to write in class. It's not something that brings me a whole lot of joy. Writing short stories is a lot harder than writing a novel, in my opinion.
So with your thesis for your MFA, did you do like a collection of short stories, or did you try to turn in a novel for your thesis?
So when I had 2 different thesis advisors since I was at 2 different MFA programs. So when I was at San Francisco, my thesis was actually Good People, a very early version of that book.
Oh,
And then when I
interesting.
transferred, between the programs before I transferred, I had a Fulbright in South Korea, and I worked on a different book during that time. But I also had finished Good People and was ready to query. So by after my first year, I didn't submit Good People as coursework again in my MFA program, and I worked on another book that was my official like thesis.
Okay, so how many full manuscripts would you say you've done? And you can choose to include the teenage years ones or not, but how many full manuscripts would you say you've completed?
If I include the stuff I wrote as a very young person, it's 7. If I don't, it's 3. So
Okay.
yeah, a lot of work.
Yeah. Do you feel like, I don't know, are there any things you can see that you learned over the course of, I mean, I feel like just finishing, like you said, just knowing that you can write a whole manuscript from start to finish is a big deal and teaches you that you can do it and then you know you can do it again. But do you feel like you kind of saw yourself growing or learned some things along the way?
Yeah, definitely. I think so by the time I started my MFA program, I had written full drafts of like a couple different novels. I might have been up to 4 at that point, but I really didn't understand how to revise or how to self-direct my own revision and stuff. So that was something that I like constantly asked my mentors and my professors for help with figuring out like what I actually need to do. What does revision actually look like on the page? What do I have to do to be able to get an agent and sell my book and stuff? That was something that I learned and kind of have been refining a lot draft to draft. And thinking about it, having just finished and turned in what might be the final manuscript for Good People, I'm kind of like, it's not something that you learn and you can learn to completion. It's something that you kind of have to develop, and it's a practice just like the writing itself, even though it's a very different mind and problems to solve than writing. But yeah, revision is a practice in and of itself.
Yes, this is speaking to me so much because I feel like when I was younger and wrote a novel and I could tell, I was like, this isn't good, but I couldn't figure out why. And I was like, well, I'll just write another one and make it better. And
Yeah.
it took me a while to realize, oh, the way you make it good is revising. Yeah, and I feel like, you know, they say that like every novel is different. I'm sure every revision is different too, and it's
Mm.
kind of an evolving practice, like you say. And I think you write on your Substack, you write about revision, right? I've seen some of your posts about revision. So tell me about your experience querying agents. So when did you start querying? What did you query them with? Let's hear all about it.
I'm the type of person that lets my ambition get ahead of my patience. I don't remember who originally said that, but I definitely queried too soon, like after finishing my first draft of Good People, which was really silly and really stupid. But as soon as I started getting responses, because like I got one full manuscript request, and I was like, oh, I don't think they should read this whole thing. And I quickly realized that okay, the book's not ready. So then I put off even entertaining the idea of querying for a long time. So just in terms of timeline, I started Good People as a series of short stories in undergrad in 2015, and then I wrote the first full draft in 2017 and queried that year, which was really stupid. I only queried like 2 or 3 agents. But then in 2019, I was trying to build a platform on Twitter and documenting my writing and revision process for Good People. And then around April, I think I got an agent that reached out to me and was like, "Hi, Kat, I've been following you on Twitter." They cited which specific tweet got their attention, which is really funny because only 6 people liked that tweet. So I'm like a big proponent of social media. It's sad that Twitter doesn't exist in the way that it did once. But even if it's like not viral, and I don't think I had really had a viral tweet at that point, I still like got attention from someone in the industry. And then I was about maybe 6 months away from finishing the book, and then that really put a fire under my ass to be like, okay, this is there's someone waiting for this book. So I finished the book in late August and queried in September. I queried most of the agents in late September, which is kind of messy. The timeline is different because I queried pre-pandemic, so things have changed a lot. But usually you would send your query letter, wait about 8 weeks to see if they want your full manuscript request. If you don't hear back, that's a silent pass and stuff. But 8 weeks after late September is Thanksgiving. And then you have to wait another, 8 to 12 weeks to hear back about the manuscript, which is Christmas. So by the time I got my
Right.
first offer, it was mid-December, right before publishing closed down for the holidays. So it's industry standard to give an agent 2 weeks to review your manuscript if you have an offer from someone else. But because the industry was closing down, I could only give people 5 business days, one, business week. So that was a little bit stressful. I always advise people to maybe query right after Labor Day or wait until October so that you're not sandwiched by holidays in a weird way. But everything worked out. And for me, sorry, that's a really long answer.
Oh, no, no. And I think that it's interesting to hear because I do think things have changed. You were querying right before the pandemic, and I do feel like everything since then has slowed down and it's, you know, just taking longer and longer for people to hear back from agents and more no response means no. And And I was going to say also, it's interesting about your Twitter story because I was literally just saying on Substack that you never know who is seeing your words and how they're responding to it, and they may never tell you, or they may tell you. This is because I had a poem published like a decade ago, and someone emailed me recently that they had been thinking about my poem for the last 10 years and turned it into a song. And I was
Oh,
like,
that's
this is I
beautiful.
know. And so, but also your tweet of like you're sending things out and you're like, oh, only three people liked it, whatever, or six people liked it, and then it turns out that's how you got your agent. So I do feel like part of it is just putting yourself out there because you never know who's going to see it, who's going to respond to it, whether it's a post or a poem or a query, and
I
um,
actually didn't end up signing with the agent that sent me that solicitation, but it motivated me to get my novel done
okay,
maybe a little bit sooner than I would before. But yeah, like it's really important to, put yourself out there like you said.
yeah,
A
yeah.
book recommendation to anybody who's listening is Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. Like that book, you can read it in one sitting and it just, tells you how to build a platform in an authentic way that aligns with your interests and your potential audience interests and things like that.
Okay, so we're up to you've signed with an agent and working on revisions to good people, and then tell me what happened next.
I signed with my agent on December 18th, so publishing closed down immediately. I got my first feedback letter from her in early January, and it was a 5-page single space letter, very dense letter. And there were kind of two issues with the book that we needed to think through. The first one was about plot. It was a very episodic book, so each chapter kind of read like a short story, which makes sense because the book originally started as a series of short stories. But that's something that you can solve with the story structure revision. The biggest problem, though, was that there was a question about the age category for the novel. The protagonist, Jo, is 20 years old, but that means she's in the no man's land between young adult and YA fiction, which is something that, like, in my 2 degrees of creative writing, nobody's ever really explained that to me, that that was going to be a problem for selling my books. I don't know if I would have written the book in that way if I had known that. My agent's initial feedback was maybe we should age Jo down to 18 and she's applying for a scholarship for college and, make it a YA book. And I had some resistance to that for a very practical reason. My ultimate goal in terms of day job work is to become a professor and work specifically with graduate students. Things are changing now, but at the time, this was, 5 years ago ish. At the time, it was really difficult to get a job as a professor. If you had a YA book out, you really needed an adult book, adult literary fiction book out to qualify for the jobs that I wanted, at least. And so I talked to her about that and she heard me out. And so she was like, okay, we'll do the plot revision and then just try adult editors. But again, the concern was that adult editors would say the book was too YA and YA editors would say the book is too adult. So we did the revision. The other issue was I was teaching at USF. So I was taking 3 classes myself and teaching 2 classes. So I was like, I don't really know when I can feasibly finish this big structural revision. So I was like, okay, I'll get back to you at spring break. This is in January. I was like, I'll get back to you spring break. Then the world ends as we know it because COVID happens. My poor dog had to get her leg amputated. So that's how I started the pandemic. She's totally fine, but
Oh my
yeah, she had a
goodness.
tumor in her knee, but she's totally fine. And I emailed my agent back around then and I was like, I know the world's really weird, but I can try to finish by July 1st. And she was like, okay. So I did the revision, finished a little bit early, and then we did about 2 or 3 more passes to focus on character arcs, thematic stuff, and then final line edits before we actually went on sub in August 2020. So that's about 9-ish months, 8, 9 months of revision, even though I wasn't really working during the school year. But so what happened is we go on sub in August 2020, and even though it's pandemic, we're actually hearing back from people and nobody's interested in the book. The feedback is what it was expected, pacing issues related to the plot issues of the book, and then also the book is too YA for adult, that sort of feedback that we
Okay.
got. And so in April 2021, we regroup and my agent's like, can we do the YA revision? But again, I need an adult book to get the jobs to support my life to write more books type of thing. So I was like, hey, I have this book that I started when I was on my Fulbright in Korea 2 years earlier. How about I work on that instead? And she was like, okay, that's fine. We'll do that. And then I moved back to Korea to continue doing research for the book. And I sent a rough draft to my agent because this book was speculative fiction, which is very different from the literary novel that she had signed me for. So I wanted to make sure that she still wanted to represent the new book. So I sent that to her in November. And like you said, things kind of close in
Yeah,
publishing from
yeah.
November to December and stuff. So she was like, okay, I can get back to you in mid-December. I moved back to Korea, and because the time difference flip-flopped, I woke up to an email from her, and she was like, "Oh, we had a meeting with Simon and Schuster, and there's a new editor who's looking for Black voices. I sent Good People. The original title was Lit by Burning. I sent Lit to this editor, and we had already kind of like accepted that the book was dead in the water. And so I saw that and literally scoffed and said aloud to myself, alone in my tiny apartment in Korea, ain't nothing gonna come of that." And then, not even 24 hours later, the editor emails my agent back and says, I started reading last night. I know Kat is someone that I want to work with. Who is like, who have you sent the book to? Are there other offers? Because he's kind of expecting a bidding war, and he doesn't know that like my book had been rejected by everyone in town, basically, which is funny.
Yeah.
And then we hop on a Zoom call, and I was shocked to find that my vision was like totally aligned with his for the book, and also really excited because I never in a million years imagined that my editor, especially for my first book, would be another Black person. So I was like, this is amazing.
Right.
And the revision was going to go around three kind of main things. One was removing a character in their storyline to kind of tighten the plot of the book, changing one character's ethnicity to being Black because he was like, here are different conversations that these characters are having related to race and class. What would it look like if Joe is talking to a Black person when she has like this Black consciousness? And I was like, you're right. This character should also be Black. And then the last one was a voice revision to fix the YA issues. And so we were kind of talking about the concept of the point of telling. So when the story is happening versus when the narrator is telling the reader the story. And so
Hmm.
he was like, right now, the story is told with this immature immediacy. You're hearing it out of the mouth of a 20-year-old. That's why it's kind of signaling YA. What we need to do is rewrite the book as if Joe has a decade, 20 years of experience and hindsight on these events. And I was like, okay. So those were the main things that we wanted to change. So that was right before publishing closed down in December 2021. Then in January, he takes the book to acquisitions. The acquisitions team has reservations because of the YA issue. And he's like, okay, what I want you to do is revise the first 50 pages, focusing on the point of telling and voice stuff, and then give me as detailed of an outline as you can for the rest of the revision. So I spent about a month working on the first 50 pages with my agent, and then we wrote about a 20-page outline describing about what will happen in the book and what I'll do on the craft level and everything. We submit it to Simon and Schuster, and unfortunately, the acquisitions team says no. She has to revise the entire manuscript before we can decide yes or no. So that's March 2021. And me and my agent me especially, were burnt out working on this book. And so she was like, okay, why don't you go back to the Korea book and just focus on that? And then so I do that for the next 10 months, I think. And then we put that book on sub. And I actually have solicitations from editors at major publishers because of my Twitter presence. So if you have any shyness about doing social media, like it's really important to do that. But even though I had 6 solicitations from big publishers and big editors, nobody wanted to buy my second book either. So that sucks.
Solicitations from editors. Like you had editors asking to see the Korea book and saying like, "Oh, we want
Yes.
to see it," but then they saw it and were like, I'm gonna pass. Is that what?
Yes. That's
Okay,
exactly
gotcha.
what happened. We also submitted the book to the same editor that wanted to buy Good People but couldn't get the, enthusiasm in-house to buy it. And we don't hear back from him until September 2023. And he was like, I like both books, but Good People is the stronger choice as a debut book to launch a debut
Mm.
writer's career. Can you edit it? Like, is there anything I can do to help you revise? And I was like, I'm like really burnt out on it. And so what he did was he worked with me for free in an unofficial capacity to,
Oh, wow.
develop the book and edit it so that his acquisitions team would say yes. And so that took about another 6 months. And then we finally, like, I finished the edit and then we submit it to them officially in February 2024. And then they offer a week later in March 2024. So that's from the first point that the editor saw the book and wanted to acquire it to when we actually sold the book was almost 3 years, which is really kind of like
Yeah,
saying that
yeah.
aloud makes me feel like a very unhinged person.
No, but I think it's so important for people to hear this. And both people who want to be writers to know how long these things take, but also people who are not in this world at all. And it's like they don't understand. They're like, oh, when's your book going to be in the bookstore? And it's like, well, first of all, it might not even be in the bookstore. But second of all,
Yeah.
this process can take so long. Yeah, I wanted to say about so what did you call it? The point of telling? Okay, I love that. I'd never heard that phrase before, but that's what I am always telling people who are trying to figure out, is this a YA book or an adult book? Is it an adult looking back at that time in their life with a with an adult perspective, and that makes it an adult book, maybe an adult coming of age, or is it the teenager is it's happening to them now and that immediacy, and that makes it a YA book. So I'll have to remember that point of telling is the phrase. So, okay, so you sold Good People finally. It sounds like once you had made all these changes though, they were like acquisitions was on board and things moved pretty quickly from there. Do you think you'll ever go back to this Korea book?
Yeah, I think so. I have an idea to revise it. And I'll give it one last shot. And then like basically when you sign with a major publisher, there's usually a clause in your contract that's called the right of first refusal. I might be mixing up the words a little bit, but something like that. So basically it's saying that your publisher gets a first look at your next work in that same market. So my next adult work, and then they get dibs basically. So I'll fix it and put it together, especially since the editor said he did like that book. I'm thinking about one thing that I'm trying to like teach myself as a writer on the craft level is to how to write a book with multiple point of view characters. So Good People just has a single point of view character, whereas my Korea book has three point of view characters, and it was kind of grouped where like the first third of the book was one character, second third was one character, third was a different character. So I'm going to try to mess with weaving it so that the chapters are alternating between the characters, and see, start with that and then see if it's something that like I want to stick with and continue. But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't think it's dead, but I've only like recently kind of saw new avenues to go back into revising that book.
Well, and I know, you kind of talked about feeling burnt out about Good People, and I don't know if you want to talk about that, like times when you just have to put something aside and
Yeah, like so when Simon and Schuster originally was like, we need the full revised manuscript. One writer might be like, oh, that's really motivating for me. Like, let me revise the entire book again. But at this point, I had been working on the book for 7 years, and I kind of like had lost hope that, there was like a couple other times where the book and also my career book made it to acquisitions, and I was kind of getting like, at least as a writer that was really tired and needed this book to start her professional career as well as a professor, I felt like I was getting the runaround a lot. And so I was like, I don't know if it makes sense for me to sink my time and effort to revising this book again when it's been so widely rejected and stuff. So that was kind of part of the reason why my agent and I decided to shift gears away from Good People and work on the Korea book instead for the next year or so. But I think that space was helpful because in September, when the editor came back and was like, can we work on Good People and can that be your debut book? That was a little bit more motivating because he was also, generous enough to sink his time, free and unpaid, into the book as well. And that kind of gave me a lot of confidence in a way to return to the story that I was done with because I had started it at such a young age. And like, I felt like, because especially since I hadn't done a full revision of the point of telling, it felt really immature to me because of the
mm,
content and the writing style. Because I wrote the bulk of the book, the most like pivotal revision, other than like the book revision that actually sold the book when I was about 24 years old, and then I was nearly 30 at the time. Looking back, and I was like, I don't really want to work on this childish thing anymore. But then the editor really helped me, see the book from within a new light and kind of figure out a way to inject my writing style as it stands now as a adult with a fully
mm.
developed brain into the book. But space is really important, and I don't think Good People would exist if I hadn't had that time away from it.
Well, and I also feel like there's such a balancing act you have to do as a writer where you have to keep hopeful, right? That's why you keep trying and keep querying and keep putting things on submission. But you also have to have this realistic attitude too of, okay, I know this could die in submission. I know this could not get accepted by the acquisitions board. And like, I don't know. I don't know if you have an answer to this or not. I'm just asking, like in general, how do writers keep that balance, you know?
Yeah. Honestly, in 2023, after my second book died on Sub, I was done. I stopped writing. I wrote like this really long diatribe on my Substack about how I was quitting writing and stuff. And everybody in my life was basically like, you can't quit writing. But I was like, I don't want to do it anymore. Like I didn't have it in me to write another book, do everything like that I did to revise the book to get it to Sub for all for nothing to happen and stuff. So it was like a really like difficult time before the editor came back to us. And even when the editor came back to me, I like had to kind of shift my perspective and stuff because I was like, I don't want to work on this book anymore. And like if I work on this book and do this like in a voice revision, as like or like most writers know, like it's a really, really long and difficult revision to do. It's not like, oh, you're adding new characters and writing new scenes. You're reconsidering every sentence that you wrote in the book. And I was like, if I do this and this doesn't work out, that's just going to like, totally unravel me as a human being, if that makes
You're like,
sense.
it's gonna
So
break me.
yeah, I was just
Yeah, no.
really done. And my agent was like, this is the only shot that we really have. Give it one more shot type of thing. And I'm glad I listened to her. And if Simon and Schuster didn't acquire the book, I really don't know what I would be doing right now and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I mean, like there's something to be said for perseverance, but then there's also something to be said for, finding peace when you realize that something that you've been doing, even if you built your entire life around it, isn't serving you anymore. And I think that was like a source of frustration I had when I was like talking to my friends and family about like, I don't want to do this anymore. But they like couldn't quite understand that it wasn't me giving up because I was, frustrated with the system or anything. It was just like, this wasn't fun anymore. And if it's not fun, what's the point
Mm-hmm.
in doing any of this? You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, I have to kind of constantly remind myself at the end of the day, like the only thing that's really in my control is the writing itself. So I need to find joy in the writing itself and the
Yes.
process. Yeah. So I don't know if you saw this. I just literally saw this last night, and it's so hard to find statistics on books that die on submission. But Mary Kole, who's a former agent,
Yes, I did see
she
this.
okay, so she said that she estimated of like agented projects, like projects going to editors, maybe 20% go to acquisitions, and then maybe 5% get an offer. So like I didn't when because so I've had two novels die in submission, and when I went out on submission, I don't think I knew that. Like I knew there was a chance that my book might not sell, but I didn't know how big of a chance. And I feel
Yes.
like one might say like, oh, well, that would be discouraging. But I think actually it's the opposite. I wish I had known because it would have
Yes.
given me perspective and helped my self-esteem a
Mm.
little bit. So I do think it's important for people to hear just how hard it is. And like sometimes you need to take a break for your sanity, basically. But anyway, well, I'm happy that you had somebody championing your novel and like almost kind of giving you the gumption you needed to go back and look at it when you thought you were done with it. So that's amazing. You're still waiting to find out when it's going to come out. Are you doing any prep for the book launch? Are you doing any preparing for when this book is finally after 7 years going to be in the world?
Oh, it's actually 10 years total because I started in
Oh, okay,
2015.
10
Yeah,
years
so
total.
basically what I've kind of talked about with my editor and an interesting thing that he does differently that I really don't think any other editors are doing this in publishing is we haven't done our official publishers marketplace announcement, the coveted little
Oh,
screenshot that says your
yes.
book's coming out
Oh, yes.
because he said that he found and my editor doesn't have a traditional publishing background. He's relatively new to the industry. I think he's been in the industry about 5 years at this point. He said that he would post the publishers marketplace stuff that announcement and then get interest from subrights or interest from film agents and things like that, and then he has to be like, no, the book won't be done for another 12 months. And then when he reaches out to those agents that are interested in converting the book into some other media or translating it into another language, 12 months later, they're like, I don't care about this book. The buzz is gone. I don't
Right.
care anymore.
Right.
So what he does is he waits until the book is like delivered and accepted, the final manuscript's delivered and accepted to actually post the PM announcement and stuff. So that'll kind of be the start of our publicity whenever the manuscript's accepted. Post that. I have ideas for like, long form pieces that I'll publish on my Substack that are about the themes of the book, not necessarily about the book itself, but like my own relationship to elite academia and how weird of a place that is. So I'll write essays about that. But right now, the goal is to do Black backdoor promotion to establish a digital imprint for good people and stuff. So that's why I'm kind of constantly, using good people as a keyword in my own Substack, just so that when people start Googling it, once it gets closer to coming out, that you see that there's a lot of content for that. And seeing content for a book that you're interested in can be really promising and help with people, figuring out what they want to read.
Ooh, this is okay. This is interesting because I hadn't heard about making sure you're putting the name of your book in your Substack posts, but that makes sense. So this is a good tip. Do you have anything else that we haven't touched on?
Not that I'm remembering, but I do remember what I was going to say earlier. One thing that makes me so excited about this podcast and, Mary Kole's post that you mentioned and stuff is that we constantly see the narratives around the unicorns, the debut writers that sell their books within 48 hours of submission, who get, six, seven figure advances, who seem to be set on the bestseller track. And that's the narrative that we see both as writers and readers, but we don't actually see that the majority of stories are kind of like these slow burn and honestly quite miserable journeys to publication. I always, like, when I was teaching undergrad, and I would have like, they would always be like, how do I publish a book? How do I publish a book? And I would always do the lecture on the last day of class. And I would just see a lot of like shell shocked faces when I explained the details of this process. And I think that's useful to them because there are going to be some students that hear all the work that you have to do it and the fact that you get paid probably very little for your advance, the fact that your book might not be sold at all kind of helps people understand that this industry might not be for them. But then it also helps people understand, like, oh, despite that, I still want to do this, but I now know to temper my expectations properly and stuff. So yeah, I think you're doing a really great service to the writing community with this podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, I agree. I think if you hear all of the things that make this hard and you're like, but I still want to do it. I don't know, in some ways that like strengthens your resolve and makes you realize like this must really be what I am meant to do. If I'm willing to, go through this long journey and know that it's not going to happen right away and tempering your expectations and somehow finding that balance of staying hopeful, but also knowing it might take a long time. Well, you've given us already a lot of tips, but do you have a tip for the road? It can be a tip about writing or marketing or how to kind of survive the ups and downs.
I'm thinking about like being on sub, which was definitely the most difficult part of the whole publishing process for me. And when I first got on sub, my agent basically said, I want to share the rejection letters with you as they come in. You're a debut writer. You're also a very young writer. I think I was 26-ish when I went on sub for the first time. I think she was thinking that it would be helpful for me to see how my work's being received and then also maybe convince me to do that YA revision, but I did that. I was resistant to and things like that. And there was value into reading that stuff, but the second time I went on sub, I actually decided I didn't want to see the rejection letters at all because I found that not knowing when they're coming in, I would, be like walking in to teach a class, and then I suddenly see that my dream publisher, even though that's something that really shouldn't exist, just passed on my manuscript, and then that just totally derails my day. So my tip for the road is not necessarily don't read the rejection letters. What I did for my second book is once a month I would email my agent and I would be like, where do we stand? Who's still considering the book and who passed on the book? So I'm not necessarily seeing the letters, but I can kind of have an idea of, do we need to do another round? Is the book dead? That sort of thing. And like knowing that this first Monday of each month is going to be the day that'll be kind of miserable is really helpful. And for writers querying, the other equivalent of that might be, making a query email address and like hiding it away from your main inbox. Because I also remember when I was querying, I queried 14 agents and 11 of them requested my full manuscript. I still got a lot of rejections and stuff. So the same thing, I'd be walking in to teach my class and then I'd see that an agent that I really liked rejected my manuscript and stuff. So trying to set aside a time and place to look at and process revision other like so that you have this dedicated time so that you can live the rest of your life kind of unbothered by it. I think that's like the biggest recommendation I have.
That is so smart. And it literally never occurred to me to make a separate query email address, but that's so smart because When I was querying, I'm just constantly like checking email. And first of all, you're just constantly checking your email and then you're getting the rejections. That's a great tip. Well, do you want to tell everybody where we can find you online?
Yeah, you can guys can find me on Substack. It's katjoelewis.substack.com. That's KATJOLEWIS.substack.com. If you Google craft with cat with a K, you can also find me that way too.
Yeah, and I will say you have so much great content on there. I was looking and you've got just about craft writing and then about querying and all kinds of revision. So, yeah, it's definitely a really good resource for writers and like almost a little MFA course, except actually talking about writing novels
Plot.
and plot. Yeah. Well, thank you so, so, so much for being here. This has been amazing. I cannot wait to read Good People. I'll definitely be looking to see when it comes out and maybe looking to see what sort of publicity you do because you seem like you know what you're doing with that. So,
I'm just trying my best.
like we all are. All right. Well, thanks again. It was great to have you.
Thanks so much for thinking of me for this.
Thanks for listening to The Long Road to Publishing, produced and edited by me, Eva Langston. A big thanks goes out to Marina Wood, who was my first listener for this episode, and the intro and outro music comes from the artist Soundroll on Upbeat. You can find me online on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Substack with the handle Eva Langston. That's EVALANGSTON. Even better, find my newsletter for writers at evalangston.substack.com and feel free to send me an email. The podcast address is longroad.pub@gmail.com. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and I'll be back soon with more stories about the long and winding path to publishing and more tips for the road.